Imagine a country that had one leader in charge for over 40 years. His name was Muammar Gaddafi. Back in 1969, he took control of Libya by kicking out the king in a military takeover. At first, he used the country's oil money to build roads, schools, hospitals, you name it. Life seemed to be improving for a while. Gaddafi also had big dreams. First, he wanted to bring Arab countries together. Later on, he changed course and focused on uniting African nations instead. But while he was making these bold moves on the world stage, things inside Libya started to fall apart. People weren't free to speak their minds. Many were jailed, tortured, or worse if they dared to disagree with him. And on top of that, Libya got a bad name for supporting violence and terrorism abroad, including a bombing in 1988 that shocked the world. Over time, the world turned its back on Libya. The country got hit with sanctions, and Gaddafi's unpredictable behaviour made him more and more isolated. Fast forward to 2011. People across North Africa and the Middle East were standing up to their governments in what became known as the Arab Spring. Libya joined in, protests broke out, starting in the city of Benghazi and quickly spread. But unlike other countries, things got really violent, really fast. Gaddafi didn't hold back. He threatened his own people, saying he'd hunt them down house by house. The world couldn't ignore it. The United Nations stepped in, and soon NATO planes were flying over Libya, launching airstrikes to stop the attacks on civilians. That moment marked the beginning of the end for Gaddafi. But instead of peace, what followed was something far more chaotic. Before we continue, we'd love to ask you a question. Do you think Libya was better under Gaddafi's rule, or better right now? Let us know what you think in the comments section below. So here's what went down after Gaddafi's grip on Libya started slipping. In the middle of all the chaos, a new group popped up called the National Transitional Council, or the NTC for short. They stepped in and basically said, hey, we're in charge now. And pretty quickly, the world started to agree. Country after country, including the African Union, gave them a thumbs up as the official voice of Libya. At the same time, rebel groups were sprouting up all over the place, kind of like mushrooms after a rainstorm. Some were formed by ordinary people who were just fed up. Others were made up of soldiers who switched sides and walked away from Gaddafi's army, especially in the east where things crumbled fast. In Zintan, a town in the west, rebels used leftover military stuff to give themselves a real edge. But for the most part, these fighters were disorganised, didn't really talk to each other, and kind of did their own thing. By August 2011, things had reached a boiling point. Rebels stormed into Tripoli, the capital, and Gaddafi vanished, just like that. He went into hiding, but it didn't last long. 2 months later, in October, rebel fighters found him in the city of Sirte. He was captured and killed that same day. Once the dust settled, the NTC stood up and announced, Libya is free. They said they'd hold elections soon and laid out a plan to rebuild the country over the next 18 months. But honestly, the plan started falling apart almost right away. The reason? Those same rebel groups that had helped bring down Gaddafi didn't just pack up and go home. Nope. They grabbed whatever weapons they could find from military bases and government buildings and held on to them like prized possessions. They knew a power struggle was coming, and they wanted to be ready. And boy, did the weapons pile up. By 2016, there were an estimated 20 million guns in a country with only 6 million people. Think about that. More guns than people by far. And with Libya's borders being wide open, weapons flowed in and out, landing in the hands of anyone who wanted power. Warlords, militias, even terrorists. Some of these militias started acting like local bosses. They'd offer protection in exchange for money or control over key buildings. Others muscled their way into government deals, getting themselves paid to guard stuff they already controlled with guns. But it didn't stop there. A bunch of rebel groups who didn't care about politics just used their firepower to run underground businesses. They smuggled everything from fuel and food to people, especially migrants from other African countries trying to make it to Europe. If you are still watching this video, it means you love these types of content. Why not take a second to hit that like button? Have you done that? Let us move. With no strong government in place, Libya turned into a free-for-all. Smugglers and shady dealers were making big money, while the new leaders were still trying to figure out how to run the country. It was like trying to organise a soccer match, while everyone else was already fighting over the ball. The people in charge, the ones who stepped in after Gaddafi was gone, didn't have much control. So instead of taking weapons away from the militias, some political parties actually gave them money. Why? Because they wanted protection. It was like paying the neighbourhood bully to keep the other bullies away. And here's where it gets wild. Instead of building a new army from scratch, the government decided to just pay former rebels and call them security forces. Many of them weren't trained. Some didn't even care about the rules. And others were extreme groups like Ansar al-Sharia, who ended up getting government cash too. Between 2011 and 2012, over $1 billion, yes, $1 billion, was handed out to fighters and anyone who claimed they had helped in the revolution. The result? Armed groups had the money and power to do whatever they wanted. With no real police or national army to stop them, they took over entire cities and regions like mini-governments. In July 2012, the original Transitional Council passed the torch to a new group of elected leaders called the General National Congress, or GNC. Their job was massive. They had to write a brand new constitution, figure out how the country should be run, and somehow get all the militias to give up their weapons and follow the law. But things didn't go as planned. Over the next 2 years, the GNC was stuck in constant arguments. Different groups wanted different things, and while they were busy fighting in meetings, armed groups outside were fighting for real. Then came a shocking moment. In September 2012, gunmen stormed the US consulate in Benghazi. 4 Americans were killed that day, including the US ambassador, Christopher Stevens. It was a chilling reminder that Libya wasn't just struggling, it was unravelling. And beneath all the political mess was Libya's biggest prize, oil. Found back in the 1950s, it had completely changed the country's fortune. Oil became the backbone of Libya's economy. Almost everything ran on it, but it also turned the country into a battleground for anyone who wanted power. After Gaddafi was gone, Libya's oil suddenly became the golden ticket. Everyone knew whoever controlled the oil had the upper hand, and in a country torn apart by fights and power struggles, that meant everything. Enter Ibrahim Jadran. If Libya's post-revolution era had its own cast of characters, Jadran was one of the headliners. Back in 2013, he wasn't just some guy with a gun, he was in charge of a new government force called the Petroleum Facilities Guard. Basically, his job was to protect Libya's oil fields and ports. He had thousands of fighters with him, and the government trusted him. At first, but Jadran had other plans. Not long after being given the keys to the country's oil sites, he went rogue. He started blocking ports, freezing oil shipments, and pointing fingers at Libya's leaders, accusing them of mismanaging the country's oil money, especially during Gaddafi's time. His message was loud and clear. Eastern Libya deserves more control and a bigger cut of the oil cash. These blockades weren't just a local headache. They cost the country more than $30 billion. That's billion, with a B. Then came the moment that made Jadran famous, or infamous, worldwide. In 2014, he gave the green light for a ship called the Morning Glory to leave the port of Sidra, carrying a load of oil he planned to sell without the government's okay. And to make things even sketchier, the ship was flying a North Korean flag. It was like trying to sneak out of the house wearing a disguise. But the world noticed. The United States Navy stepped in. They found the ship sailing near Cyprus, boarded it, and took control. The Morning Glory was sent right back to Libya, with its oil still on board, like a kid being sent home after getting caught shoplifting. Even after that stunt, Jadran stayed a major player. The government tried to talk with him, strike deals, calm things down, but he held one huge bargaining chip. He could stop Libya's oil exports with a single order, and in a country that runs on oil, that kind of power made him hard to ignore. But nothing lasts forever. In 2016, Jadran's grip started to slip. A new force called the Libyan National Army, led by General Khalifa Haftar, moved in and took over the oil terminals. Suddenly Jadran wasn't calling the shots anymore. Meanwhile, across the country, fighting between militias became a regular part of life. Sometimes it lasted just a day or two. Then a deal would be made, the guns would quiet down, and people would go back to their routines until the next battle started. Things in Libya took a sharp turn in 2014 when a familiar name re-entered the spotlight: Khalifa Haftar. He wasn't new to the scene. In fact, he had deep roots in Libya's military past. Back in the day, he stood right beside Muammar Gaddafi during the coup that took over the country in 1969. Haftar was part of the original Inner Circle. But that friendship didn't last forever. In the 1980s, things fell apart between the two. After a failed military adventure in Chad, Haftar was left stranded. Gaddafi wanted nothing more to do with him. That's when Haftar switched sides, or at least that's what some people say. Reports from the time suggest he made contact with the Chadian government and joined a group called the Libyan National Salvation Front, which was basically trying to push Gaddafi out of power. Then something strange happened. Whispers started floating around about Haftar getting help from the United States, and not just a little help. According to reports from the New York Times, he and a few hundred of his men were trained by American intelligence agents in sabotage and guerrilla tactics. Their training camp, right outside Chad's capital, N'Djamena. Apparently, even President Ronald Reagan gave the green light, but the story didn't stop there. In 1990, Chad's government collapsed, and suddenly, Haftar and his fighters had nowhere to go. The US tried to relocate them to Kenya or Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of Congo. But when that didn't work out, they brought them straight to America. Just like that, the would-be rebel commander was living in the suburbs of Virginia. For nearly 2 decades, Haftar led a quiet life in the US, or at least it seemed that way on the surface. He settled down with his family in a house not far from CIA headquarters in Langley. That coincidence fueled all sorts of rumours. Was he still working with the CIA? Some people think so. Haftar himself reportedly admitted to having regular chats with them while living in Virginia. But even though he was thousands of miles away from Libya, he never really let go of his old ambitions. He kept in touch with people back home, especially those who wanted Gaddafi out of the picture. So when the 2011 revolution broke out, Haftar packed his bags and returned. He started pulling together old army contacts, rebuilding the network he once commanded, and positioning himself for what came next. For a while, nobody really heard much from Khalifa Haftar. He stayed quiet, mostly keeping to the eastern side of Libya. Then, out of nowhere in February 2014, he popped up on TV. Standing in front of a Libyan flag, he made a bold announcement. He was launching a takeover. He said the government at the time, the General National Congress, or GNC, had totally failed, especially when it came to stopping dangerous Islamist groups. A lot of people around the world laughed it off. It looked like a random power grab, but Haftar didn't care. Just a few months later, in May, he launched a full-blown military campaign. He called it Operation Dignity, and its main target was a group called Ansar al-Sharia, along with other Islamist militias. From the start, Haftar made one thing clear. To him, anyone tied to political Islam was a threat. He labelled them terrorists and gave them 3 choices: leave Libya, go to jail, or die. That kind of talk didn't exactly help things calm down. Instead, Islamist groups that had been fighting each other suddenly teamed up under a new banner: Libya Dawn. Together they launched attacks of their own. Soon battles broke out across the country. One major clash happened at Tripoli's international airport, fighting between Haftar's forces in the east and the Libya Dawn coalition in the west. This was no longer a tug of war, it was a full-on civil war. And just when things couldn't seem more chaotic, Libya held another election in June 2014. The Islamist parties didn't do well. In fact, they lost big. But here's the thing, many of them didn't accept the results. Instead of stepping aside, they brought back the old parliament, the GNC, and claimed it was still in charge. This new version, based in Tripoli, was called the Libyan Salvation Government. Meanwhile, the newly elected parliament, called the House of Representatives, set up shop in Tobruk, Khalifa Haftar and his military. With no real central government in charge, Libya became the perfect place for outside threats to move in. That's when a new and terrifying group showed up: ISIS. They took advantage of the chaos and started gaining ground. By 2016, they had taken over the city of Sirte, turning it into their biggest base outside Iraq and Syria. Weapons and fighters started pouring into Libya, spilling over into other countries like Mali, Niger and Chad. Haftar's army spent years fighting to push them out. By mid-2018, he announced that his forces had taken back Derna, one of ISIS's last strongholds in eastern Libya. But ISIS didn't disappear. They just changed tactics, hiding in the desert, launching surprise attacks, and keeping the country on edge. As things spiraled out of control, the United Nations stepped in. They brought rival groups to the table, including Haftar's side, and helped broker a deal. It was called the Libyan Political Agreement, or LPA, and it was signed in Morocco in late 2015. That deal led to a brand new government based in Tripoli, the Government of National Accord, or GNA. The international community stood behind it, but back home in Libya, not everyone was on board. The House of Representatives in the east, along with Haftar's powerful army, refused to recognise it. Shattered when fighting suddenly broke out again in the capital. Armed groups clashed in the streets, and people had to run for cover. Just when it seemed like the city might spiral into chaos, the United Nations stepped in and convinced the warring sides to pause. By September, a shaky ceasefire was in place. While Tripoli was trying to catch its breath, another storm was brewing, this time over oil, Libya's most valuable resource. Back in January 2018, the eastern side of Libya, where the House of Representatives had set up their own government, made a bold move. They chose their own head for the eastern branch of the central bank. That might sound like boring paperwork, but in Libya, it meant something huge. The country's financial system was now officially split in two. Then came more trouble. Remember Ibrahim Jadran, the former oil guard commander who had caused all that drama years earlier? He made a comeback. In June, his forces showed up and took over two major oil ports, Ras Lanuf and Es Saida. These ports weren't just any old spots, they were the gates to Libya's oil wealth. But General Khalifa Haftar wasn't about to let that slide. His troops launched an offensive and pushed Jadran's men out. After regaining control, Haftar made a big announcement. From now on, all oil ports under his control would send their revenue to the eastern branch of the central bank. The oil would also be managed by the eastern version of the National Oil Corporation, the one that supported his side. This caused a major stir internationally, but the global powers were clear. They would only do business with the official National Oil Corporation, based in Tripoli, the one backed by the United Nations. Even though General Haftar had taken control of several key oil ports, the message from the outside world was loud and clear. We're only doing business with the official oil company in Tripoli. That meant no matter who held the oil fields on the ground, only the Tripoli-based National Oil Corporation had the green light to sell it. But that didn't stop the conflict from boiling over. In April 2019, General Khalifa Haftar made a bold move. His forces, part of what he called the Libyan National Army, started marching toward Tripoli. His goal? To take over the capital and remove the Government of National Accord, or GNA, the same group backed by the United Nations. Suddenly Tripoli found itself under threat. Haftar's troops claimed they had reached the edge of the city and even advanced into the southern suburbs. The fighting was especially heavy around the area of the old international airport. Haftar kept calling it a mission to liberate the city, but the GNA and its allies didn't see it that way at all. Inside Tripoli, the GNA wasn't sitting back. They pushed back hard, capturing more than 100 of Haftar's soldiers and trying to hold the line. All the while, the UN and other countries kept calling for a stop to the fighting, but the guns didn't go quiet. Behind the scenes, Haftar had powerful friends. Egypt, the UAE and Russia were in his corner, offering weapons, money and political backing. To them, Haftar looked like a strongman who could bring order and fight back against Islamist groups. They didn't want gaining power in Libya. At first, his advance was fast, but once his forces reached Tripoli's doorstep, they hit a wall. For months, they couldn't break through. The city held firm, and the battle turned into a long, grinding stalemate. Things shifted again in early 2020. The GNA reached out to Turkey, asking for help. Not long after, Turkish troops and military advisors arrived in Tripoli, bringing with them drones and equipment to help defend the capital. With that new support, the GNA started planning a major pushback. Meanwhile, all efforts by the United Nations to get everyone to sit down and talk went nowhere. The fighting only got worse and more civilians were caught in the crossfire. With the country in chaos, outside groups saw their chance. Mercenaries from different countries started flooding in, one of the most infamous being Russia's Wagner group. These fighters didn't just show up to help. They grabbed power, took control of oil sites, and dug in. By the summer of 2020, Libya had been through years of war, chaos, and back-and-forth power grabs. But something surprising happened that August. things finally started to calm down. The UN-backed government in Tripoli, known as the GNA, decided to call for a ceasefire on its own, hoping it would bring a break in the fighting. Around the same time, General Khalifa Haftar, who had been blocking Libya's oil exports for months, decided to lift the blockade. These two moves opened the door to a bigger peace deal. Just a couple of months later, in October, leaders from both sides signed a nationwide ceasefire agreement. It was a rare moment of agreement in a country used to deep division. With hopes rising, a new temporary government was created in March 2021. It was called the Government of National Unity, or GNU. The idea was simple: bring everyone under one roof, calm things down, and finally set the stage for real elections. At first, people were hopeful. Maybe, just maybe, this could be the moment Libya turned the page. Plans were made to hold elections for both parliament and president by the end of 2021. But that didn't happen. Political groups couldn't agree on the rules. Arguments broke out over who could run, how the voting should work, and who had the final say. Eventually, the elections were pushed off indefinitely. For Libyans, it felt like déjà vu. Ever since Gaddafi was removed from power in 2011, the country has been on a roller coaster. Hope, collapse, and more hope again. What started with dreams of freedom turned into a long stretch of violence, rival governments, and a never-ending struggle for control. Even former US President Barack Obama reflected on this. In an interview on American TV, when asked about his biggest mistake in office, he pointed to Libya. He said the US had done the right thing by stepping in, but failed to plan for what came next after Gaddafi was gone. Still, in the middle of all the pain and political mess, something powerful happened. On the streets of Tripoli, crowds came together in February to mark the anniversary of the 2011 revolution. Flags waved, music played, and people gathered to remember what they fought for. Some said it was about turning the page on dictatorship. Others talked about building a fairer, more just Libya. And even though the country is still divided and facing big challenges, many in the crowd believe that the spirit of the revolution is still alive, that real change is still possible. Did you find this video interesting? Let us know what you think in the comments section below.